Hello to everybody, and welcome back to Be Like Christ. Today we're talking about Acts chapter 16 in 5 minutes. If you want this handout, you can download it in the link down in the description below. When did the events of Acts chapter 16 take place? Well, this is on Paul, Silas, and Timothy's preaching journey. This likely happened between the years 49 and 52 AD. As far as our main characters here, we've got the usual of being Paul. He's been featured in the last couple of chapters. He's an apostle who worked throughout the Mediterranean region, planting and strengthening churches. Silas, who was originally from Jerusalem, and he accompanied Paul on this second journey that he made. We've got Timothy. He's a disciple from either Lystra or Derbe. It's not exactly clear, but he joined Paul when he passed through those regions preaching. We've got Lydia, who Paul is going to meet in Philippi, and she's going to become one of the first converts in the city of Philippi, the church there. And then a Philippian jailer. He was a prison guard who asked Paul and Silas what he needed to do to be saved after a great earthquake. As far as where these events take place, the map above is going to be handy because there's going to be a lot of these places that most people probably aren't familiar with. The chapter opens with Paul and Silas visiting churches in Derbe and Lystra, and they then attempt to go to the north and preach, but God prohibited them. After passing through the region of Mysia, which is the far west of modern Turkey, Paul received directions to go to Macedonia and preach. So Paul, Silas, and Timothy, they sailed through the North Aegean Sea until they came to the Roman colony of Philippi. Okay, and so now for our outline of the chapter. The first section, verses 1 through 5, a third traveling companion joins Paul and Silas. So Paul and Silas were in Derbe and Lystra, and they met a disciple there named Timothy, who had a very good reputation in the church. Paul asked Timothy to accompany them on their journey, and Timothy agreed. And so the trio went from town to town, city to city, encouraging and preaching, teaching, introducing people to Jesus, and sharing the decision that was made back in Acts chapter 15 by the Council of Elders and Apostles in Jerusalem. In our second section, Paul receives direction from a vision in the night, verses 6 through 10. So the Holy Spirit prevented Paul, Silas, and Timothy from going and preaching in Asia. We don't know why, but God wanted him to go somewhere else. He also prevented the group from going north to an area known as Bithynia. In Troas, Paul received a vision. It was a vision of a man, and he said to Paul, quote, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." In our third section, verses 11 through 15, Lydia becomes a disciple, a believer in the city of Philippi. So Paul, Silas, Timothy, after Paul had that vision, they all get in a boat. They sail to Philippi, which was a Roman colony. Outside the city there was a river where people gathered to pray. And the group of preachers, they went down to this river and started talking to people. There was a woman named Lydia who heard their message gladly, and she was baptized and all of her household. But in the next section, Paul and Silas get thrown into prison, verses 16 through 24. So one day there was this slave girl who had a, quote, spirit of divination. And she met Paul and she started yelling. She started saying, quote, "These men are servants of the Most High God who proclaim the way of salvation." And she did this repeatedly for several days until Paul basically got annoyed with her and he cast the spirit out of the woman. Now, this slave woman's, her owners, they were very upset about this because they used to make a lot of money off of her divinations, off this spirit that possessed her. They seized Paul and Silas and they dragged them in front of the city rulers who commanded them to be beaten with rods. And then they were thrown into the inner part of the prison and they were fastened in stocks. And then the chapter concludes in verses 25 through 40. There's a great earthquake in Philippi, and we meet a Philippian jailer who is watching over this prison. So at midnight, that same night, Paul and Silas were singing hymns in the prison. They had just been beaten, but they were singing. And suddenly there was this great earthquake, and the doors of the prison opened, and everyone's bonds were unfastened. The jailer, thinking that he had just lost all of his prisoners and basically would have humiliated him in his official role, he is about to kill himself. But Paul stops him from doing it. And he immediately asks Paul and Silas, "What do I need to do to be saved?" He must have heard their singing. The two preachers went to the Philippian jailer's house. They taught him and his household, and that same night they were all baptized. And when it was discovered in the morning that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens and had been beaten unlawfully, the city rulers let them out of prison and they apologized. And Paul and Silas went and they visited Lydia before leaving Philippi. And now for our application. Your positive attitude during times of difficulty and trial can have a huge impact on the people who are observing you. In Acts 16, Paul and Silas were thrown into prison and they were beaten, and yet they still found joy in Jesus and were singing hymns while they were chained to the wall. Whatever they were singing, the Philippian jailer must have heard, because immediately after the earthquake that freed all of the prisoners, he ran up to Paul and Silas and said, "What do I need to do to be saved?" When we rejoice through suffering rather than sulking through it, we may be having a powerful impact on other people, even if we're never aware of it.